Modern economics can seem a very difficult thing to understand in the face of all of the complex theories and mathematical formulas that modern economists bandy about. But really, the underlying concept is so simple that once you understand it all of the complex formulas and theories become more of a distraction than a tool. Let's take a look at a concept that should be familiar to many of you. This is the concept of network marketing, which was made popular by the company Amway. In this model, we have some older high-level participants who have worked to establish a network of salespeople. These salespeople, in exchange for the privilege of being part of the club, will forfeit some of their commissions to the person who recruited them. Now, why would they want to do that? Well, because they can in turn recruit new salesmen and collect a portion of what those salesmen earn. It's a very simple concept. The people who are the most successful are the ones who joined early and have a large network. Now, the people at the bottom initially don't make much money until they build a network of their own, which the higher level recruits are supposed to help them do. Eventually, they can do okay, but it's the higher level people who tend to do the best. So the motivation is to work your way up in the organization. This means that each person is incented not only to sell product, but also to recruit new salespeople. You might say that part of the function of the older recruits is to make the promise to the new recruits that they will eventually be able to make some money off of the labor of others if they stick around long enough and grow their network. In return for making convincing promises, the older recruits are able to generate current income. The key feature of this structure that must be kept in mind is that it is only viable so long as the base of the pyramid continues to grow. Without new recruits, the old ones at the base lose confidence and leave the structure, and so it disintegrates from the bottom up. In a stable network marketing organization, we can visualize a flow being established. Current wealth flows from the bottom of the organization to the top. Promises flow from the top of the organization to the bottom. As long as there is evidence that the older promises are kept, then enough new recruits can be attracted to keep the flow of wealth in exchange for promises flowing. What distinguishes those on the top from those on the bottom is that those on the top are the wealth receivers and the promise makers. Those at the bottom are the promise receivers and the wealth providers. Keep that in mind as we proceed through this video. So, can we visualize how this type of structure relates to other economic structures? Sure, we can. If we take a look at our current system of paper wealth and paper financing, we can find this structure all over the place. For example, corporations have a very few highly paid people at the top who earn the most money, followed by more mid-level managers who supervise still more lower-level, lower compensated employees. The low-level employees will typically join the company for the promise of advancement. Each successive level up will benefit from the efforts of those at the lower levels. The power structure of governments is typically set up in the same way as that of corporations. A few highly paid individuals will manage the efforts of successively larger groups of lower-level managers and workers who are paid progressively less the closer to the bottom that they are. I suppose you could say that as a taxpayer, you yourself might find yourself at the lowest level of this structure. In addition to power structures looking like this, financial structures are also set up like this. All we need to do to visualize what the pyramid looks like is to analyze the flow of wealth and promises. Let's take a look at a few examples. The currency can be characterized by a promise made by the organization that has the power to create the currency. The promise might be worded, "You do work or surrender tangible goods for me now in exchange for a number that you might be able to use in the future in order to obtain goods." A bond can be characterized by a promise made by a borrower. The promise goes like this: "You forfeit to me now your number in exchange for a promise of more numbers in the future." A stock can be characterized by a promise made by the stock issuer. The promise goes like this: "You give to me your number now in exchange for a claim on some of the numbers that I produce with the equipment that I buy." Social Security, pensions, and other annuities can be characterized by a promise that goes like this: "You give to me your number now in exchange for a promise of the numbers that the others give to me in the future." Visualized in terms of the flow of current wealth in exchange for future promises, we can immediately see that the financial structure called corporate finance looks something like this. The Federal Reserve and federal government are at the very top because they can create the currency and exchange it for current goods and services. The mechanism used to do this is deficit spending, which creates government bonds which are bought by member banks in exchange for the currency. They can also indirectly collect current services through taxation, which is essentially calling in the previously issued currency and thus using it as a method of current payment. The important thing to note here is that the government primarily collects present goods and services in exchange for nothing but promises. This is what puts them on the top of the pyramid. The middle layer is the corporation. The corporation will provide goods and services to the originators of the cash, which places them on a lower level of the pyramid. Below the corporations are the employees, who provide current services to the corporation in return for cash, which, as we've discussed, is just a promise that someone else will be willing to exchange goods and services for it at some point in the future. Also on the bottom is the stockholder and the bondholder. The corporation will issue stock and bonds, which are really just promises of future cash in exchange for current cash. I'm sure that many would argue with the way that I've arranged things here. After all, shouldn't the stockholders be placed on the top as the technical owners of the corporation? Well, I'd argue that the answer is no, because the stockholder has forfeited current wealth in exchange for just a promise. The corporate bondholder is also in the same situation. All they have are promises, and those promises can only be honored if the corporation grows. What has to happen for the corporation to grow? Well, it has to add more employees, issue more bonds, and issue more stock. Thus, the stockholders, bondholders, and employees are all on the bottom. In addition, nowadays, a good portion of the stock and bonds are owned by employees through 401k plans. But the corporation is really just a legal entity. It can't actually benefit from the structure. So that's a very good point that needs to be considered. So who is the real beneficiary of the corporate finance structure? Well, that's a very good question, and I've thought about this long and hard. It's not the group of stockholders and bondholders who benefit the most from the structure. They have forfeited wealth in the here and now in exchange for mere promises. No, in modern economics, the chief beneficiary is the corporate executive. So let's put our group of corporate executives on the top of the pyramid. We can envision the transfer of huge quantities of current wealth in the form of cash from the corporation to the corporate executives. From personal experience, I know that executives at my company are compensated anywhere between $3 and $10 million per year in the form of cash salary and stock options. Other Fortune 500 companies pay their executives even more. To be fair, there is probably an arrow going the other direction because the executives do provide some level of current service to the company in exchange for their salary. So, let's fix that. There, that's better. Now nobody can argue that we're not being fair to our corporate executive. If anything, I've probably made the arrow much too big. But if I made it any smaller, you probably would have some trouble seeing it. So now we have corporate finance summarized using a fairly simple framework. It's probably much different from how you've been told that it works, but I think you'll find that this model is appropriate. The ones at the top of the pyramid are those who benefit the most in the here and now, in exchange for promises instead of in exchange for real current value. Notice how close the corporate executives are to the federal government at the top of the pyramid? Is that a coincidence? I don't think so. So now let's try a different modern financial structure. Let's model pensions. To make it specific, let's go with the biggest pension system of them all, the Social Security system. At the top of the pyramid, we still have the federal government and the Federal Reserve as before. They are the originators of cash, and so at the top they stay. The middle layer are those who are getting current value, the retirees. The federal government provides the promise of future cash to the retirees. In other words, they promise to keep the system going and continue to keep the cash flowing to the retirees. They do this in exchange for political support in the form of votes. But they also do it for cash. Yes, that's right. I drew a cash arrow going up to the top of the pyramid. The reason why I did this is because for most of Social Security's existence, the cash taken from the bottom of the pyramid far exceeded the cash paid out to the retirees. The government spent that cash, which made them a beneficiary of present value. Recently, the arrow has changed direction, but I'm sure the government is thinking about fixing that situation via some form of reform that may involve the 401k system or other mechanism. At the bottom of the pyramid, we have current workers. They are giving up cash now in exchange for promises of future cash. The promise of future cash is the only thing that maintains the political support of the current workers to keep the system going, though that support seems to be rapidly waning. So let's think about this system a little bit more. What are the flaws? Well, the first obvious flaw is that in order to keep it sustainable, the base of the pyramid needs to be much bigger than the middle. Lately, because of demographic trends and employment trends, the middle has been swelling and the base has been shrinking. This has threatened to reverse the flow of cash to the top of the pyramid, which is unacceptable to those at the top. But this change in shape has another effect, and the effect will be seen here. Those at the base of the pyramid treat the promise of future cash as savings. As the threat to the future flow of cash becomes obvious to all participants, those at the base of the pyramid, which constitutes the majority of participants, will lose faith in the system and will withdraw political support for it. They will no longer be interested in forfeiting current value in exchange for promises. In addition, there won't be enough workers relative to beneficiaries to supply the flow of cash that has been promised in the past. So what it does is put in jeopardy the flows that have been circled here. But what will those at the top of the house do to fix this problem? They are not going to halt the system altogether. That would anger too much of the support at the base and also cut off one of their sources of current government income. They need to figure out a way to increase the present flow of cash from current workers. They could increase the retirement age and broaden the base relative to the middle, but that would only fix the problem in the future, because they'd have to grandfather the people in who are close to receiving benefits now. And we all know that politicians don't fix future problems. They only fix present crises. They probably won't increase the payroll tax. That would further weaken a sputtering economy. Let's see what else they could do. What if under the cover of a very weak economy, they launch a stimulus program? This program would have the Federal Reserve buy, say, $40 billion a month in mortgage-backed securities. How could this help? Well, what it would do is increase the revenue flowing up from the base of the pyramid. Now, instead of just payroll taxes flowing up from the bottom, we now have mortgage payments flowing from the base to the Federal Reserve. And because the Federal Reserve turns over all of its profits to the Treasury, it will give the Treasury additional cash to distribute as it pleases. Part of it will go to fill in the Social Security gap. See? Modern finance is simple. You don't have to know a lot of math or complex theories. All you need to do is look at the flow of current benefits and future promises. Though this does present you with a bit of a problem if you agree with the way that I've shown my models. Eventually, this structure will collapse as well, and it might happen during your lifetime. There's only one way that you can minimize the damage that it does to you and your family in that event, and that is to convert as many of the promises that have been made to you as possible into real, tangible, current wealth. You can't opt out of making payroll tax payments. You can't redeem the promises held in your 401k plan without leaving your job, which is a very dangerous thing to do in the current economy. What you can do, though, is stop contributing to your 401k and use the cash that it frees up to buy real wealth. You can cash out any IRAs that you have, pay the 10% penalty, and buy real wealth. You can also pay off your mortgage as quickly as possible and then use the cash that is freed up to buy real wealth. The key is to minimize the amount of current wealth that you forfeit in return for nothing but empty promises.